Right now, touch something. Your phone, the table, your own hand. It feels obvious, undeniable. You are touching it. But here is the unsettling truth. At the most fundamental level of reality, you have never actually touched anything. Not once. No matter how solid an object feels, no matter how strong the pressure in your fingers, the atoms in your hand never truly make contact with the atoms in the object. There is always distance. What you call touch is not contact at all. It is a force, a silent resistance, an invisible barrier pushing back. And the stranger part is this: your entire experience of the physical world depends on something that never really happens. So if nothing ever truly touches anything, what is it that you are actually feeling? And how much of your reality exists only inside your mind? Touch is the first sense you ever trust. Before you understand language, before you recognize faces, you learn about the world through contact. You press your hands against the ground. You grasp objects. You feel heat, texture, resistance. Touch feels immediate and undeniable. When you push against a wall, it pushes back. When you hold something solid, it doesn't pass through your hand. This is how the world teaches you what is real. Things that resist you exist. Things you can feel are there. We rarely question this assumption. Touch feels different from sight or sound. Light can trick you. Sound can echo and distort. But touch feels honest, direct. It feels like proof. You can close your eyes, turn off the lights, stand in complete darkness, and still know where you are by what your body touches. This sense of contact becomes the foundation for how we understand reality itself. We talk about hard facts. We say something is tangible. We trust what we can physically feel. Even our language reflects this bias. We say ideas are grasped. We say experiences hit us. We say something doesn't feel right. Touch becomes more than a sense. It becomes a metaphor for certainty. So when someone claims that you've never actually touched anything, your instinct is to reject it immediately. Because if touch isn't real in the way we think, then the boundary between you and the world is far less solid than it seems. And that idea is deeply uncomfortable. But discomfort is often the first sign that something important is being questioned. Because the moment you stop trusting touch, you begin to realize that your experience of reality may not be as direct as it feels. Here is where intuition quietly fails. When you press your hand against a table, it feels like two solid surfaces meeting. But on the smallest scales, nothing like that is happening. Your hand is made of atoms. The table is made of atoms. And atoms are not solid objects in the way you imagine them. They are mostly empty space. At the center of each atom is a tiny nucleus. Around it, electrons form clouds of probability, not hard shells. When your hand approaches the table, the atoms in your skin do not collide with the atoms in the wood or metal. Instead, something else happens. The electrons in your hand begin to repel the electrons in the table. This repulsion is electromagnetic. It is incredibly strong, and it activates long before any physical contact could occur. The closer your hand gets, the stronger the repulsion becomes. What you feel as touch is this resistance, a force pushing back. No atoms ever meet. No surfaces ever truly connect. There is always a microscopic gap, small beyond imagination, but real. In fact, if it were somehow possible to remove this electromagnetic repulsion, your hand would pass straight through the table. Not because the table isn't there, but because solidity is not what you think it is. Solidity is not contact. It is balance. A balance between opposing forces, holding structures apart. This is true everywhere. When you sit on a chair, when you lean against a wall, When your feet touch the ground, you are being held up by fields, not by matter touching matter. And once you see this, the idea of touch begins to dissolve, because what you experience is not contact with objects, it is interaction with forces. And that raises a much deeper question. If you never truly touch the world, then where exactly does your body end, and where does the universe begin? Let's slow this down. Imagine your hand moving toward a table, not quickly, but gradually, deliberately, so slowly that you could freeze time at any moment and look closer. As your hand approaches, nothing dramatic happens. No sparks, no collision, no sudden impact. Instead, invisible fields begin to interact. Long before your skin reaches the surface, the electrons in your hand sense the electrons in the table. They respond the only way they know how, by pushing back. Now imagine zooming in, past skin, past cells, past molecules, down to individual atoms. You expect to see tiny solid spheres bumping into one another, but that's not what's there. You find vast regions of emptiness with particles held in place by forces acting across space. There are no sharp boundaries, no clear surfaces. What you thought was a solid edge is actually a region where forces grow rapidly stronger. As your hand gets closer, the electromagnetic repulsion increases, creating resistance. Your brain interprets that resistance as contact, as pressure, as touch, but nothing ever collides. Now imagine pushing harder. The repulsion increases again. Atoms shift slightly. Structures deform, but still no contact. Even at extreme pressures, the story remains the same. What changes is not distance, but force. The table does not stop your hand because it is solid. It stops your hand because the forces between atoms reach an equilibrium. This is why materials feel different. Metal feels hard because its atomic structures resist deformation strongly. Rubber feels soft because those structures rearrange more easily. But in both cases, you are never touching the atoms themselves. You are negotiating with fields. Now imagine something even stranger. Imagine you could turn off all electromagnetic interactions. No repulsion, no attraction. In that universe, your hand would pass through the table as effortlessly as light through glass. Not because the table vanished, but because solidity vanished with it. At that point, the idea of touch would no longer exist. And this reveals something profound. Touch is not a fundamental interaction with matter. It is a story your nervous system tells about forces it cannot see, a translation, a useful illusion. And once you realize that, the world begins to feel less like a collection of objects and more like a continuous web of interactions. If nothing ever truly makes contact, then the obvious question becomes unavoidable. What are you actually feeling? The answer is not in your hands. It is in your nervous system. When your hand approaches an object, the electromagnetic forces pushing back cause tiny deformations in your skin. Cells compress, molecules shift, ion channels in nerve endings open and close. These changes trigger electrical signals, signals that travel up your arm, through your spinal cord, and into your brain. Your brain never receives touch. It receives data, patterns of electrical activity that it has learned to interpret as pressure, texture, temperature, and pain. Roughness is not something you feel directly. It is inferred from variations in force. Hardness is not sensed as solidity. It is inferred from how strongly resistance increases. Even temperature is not a direct reading of heat. It is a measurement of energy transfer. Translated into sensation, your experience of touch is a construction, a model, a story the brain tells itself about interactions happening at a distance. And this story is remarkably convincing. So convincing that you forget it is a story at all. But once you realize this, a subtle shift occurs. You begin to understand that every physical sensation you experience is mediated, filtered, interpreted. You are not directly connected to the external world. You are connected to signals about the external world. This does not make your experience false. It makes it indirect. And that distinction matters. Because if touch, the most trusted sense, is not a direct encounter with reality, then neither are sight, sound, or smell. They are all interfaces, useful ones, but interfaces nonetheless. Your brain does not show you the world as it is. It shows you a version of the world that is good enough to survive in, a simplified map, not the territory itself. And that realization quietly undermines one of our deepest assumptions, that we experience reality directly. If touch itself is an interpretation, then being in contact with the world means something very different from what we intuitively believe. If you never truly touch anything, then a quiet question begins to surface. Where does your body actually end? We imagine ourselves as separate from the world, a clear boundary. Skin on one side, everything else on the other. But that boundary is not as sharp as it feels. Your body is constantly exchanging energy with its surroundings. Heat flows out, air moves in and out, fields overlap. At the atomic level, there is no clear line where you stop and the world begins. Only regions where interactions change. The sense of separation you feel is not drawn by matter. It is drawn by perception. Your nervous system creates the idea of a boundary because it needs one to function, to move, to avoid harm, to survive. But physically, that boundary is a gradient, not a wall. You are less like an object in the universe and more like a process within it, a pattern of interactions maintained over time. And touch, the thing that made the world feel solid and external, turns out to be one of the strongest illusions holding that pattern together. This is not meant to make reality feel distant or unreal. It is meant to show how deeply connected everything already is. You are not isolated from the universe, reaching out to make contact. You are already immersed in it, constantly interacting, constantly exchanging forces and information. The feeling of separation is useful, but it is not fundamental. And once you see that, the question shifts. It is no longer about whether you touch the world. It is about how the universe experiences itself through systems like you. So you have never truly touched anything, not because the world is an illusion and not because matter isn't real, but because reality at its deepest level is not built from solid contact. It is built from relationships, from forces acting across space, from interactions without collision, from boundaries that exist more in perception than in matter itself. What you experience as touch is not the meeting of two objects, but the moment your nervous system decides an interaction has become meaningful, a translation, a signal, a story that allows you to navigate the world. And once you see this, the world doesn't become less real. It becomes more subtle, more interconnected. You are not a thing pressing against other things. You are a process, moving within a universe of other processes, all influencing one another without ever truly colliding. So here is the question to leave you with. If you have never actually touched anything, and everything you feel is the result of invisible forces and interpretations, then where do you really end? And where does the universe begin?